My name is Mackenzie Morris. Mackenzie is hard to spell because my mom spelled it wrong on my birth certificate, if you weren't here for that story. I'm a PhD dropout in chemical engineering from yours truly at USC. I dropped out after a year because I decided that being poor sucked. So I went and got a job at T-Cube, which didn't pay at all, so that was a terrible decision. And I loved working there because I basically had free beer, and that was like the coolest perk to a 22-year-old. So that is where I initially met people from ColaSec. It was at Conquest, and I worked in this building, and they met here. So
for the record, as a 34-year-old, free beer is still a pretty cool damn cool.
Yeah, right. So my manager at TQ was a bartender at Conquest and was also my roommate. And if you are a bartender at Conquest, you get a free gallon of beer every time you work.
What?
Damn. Yeah, right.
I'm gonna send my resignation real quick.
So we had. He worked like 3 or 4 nights a week. So we basically, when I went there, I would bring my laptop and continue working, and the beer flowed forward. That was like a very chunk year of my life. I was on Team USA in 2012 for Modern Pentathlon. Fun fact. And I grew up on a horse farm, and I will never live on a farm again. Like, fuck outdoors. I have enough of that shit, and just like spending my entire life working on a farm kind of sucked. Now I play video games and refuse to see the light. And this is my dog. His name is Corgi. He is a Corgi. He is adorable, and he is an angel. Yeah, and he is an angel. So here he is. I always feel like that's probably the most interesting fact about me. Supply chain, kind of a overwhelming beast. Supply chain is basically how you get things from being dirt in the ground to being microprocessors in motherboards and server racks. It goes through a lot of companies, a lot of people, a lot of actors, and a lot of shipping. Most of the precious metals in the world exist in not so great places, so Africa and China and or other Asian countries that don't have like the best governments or the most pristine, honorable companies. Although I guess American companies tend not to be any better. When I wrote the slide, it was originally the Secretary of Homeland Security. Since then, Kirsten Gilligan has resigned and or been fired, depending on who you ask. But it's hard to vet who you are. Some people have NERC requirements. Some people have, some people don't care. Some people work for international companies that source their computer components from all over. And some people work for the U.S. federal government that has stringent requirements on where they source their components from. For example, I work for Savannah River, and I work for the Department of Energy, and we have a requirement for higher value assets to be sourced by American-only organizations, and that goes through a huge vetting process and IT governance, and that can be 6 to 9 months. And all of our components have to be produced in-house by American companies by American citizens. So I originally drafted this idea about high-value assets because I work in the nuclear industry. We produce warheads, so controllers for ballistic missiles that carry nuclear payloads are high-value assets because that's the last thing you'd want to be compromised by supply chain interdiction or rogue mother chips or bad firmware. So we can put a considerably larger number of dollars into our budget because we basically have a $3 billion contract from the U.S. government to complete our business. That is not not all companies can do this. Not all organizations can do this, but this is more of a proof of concept about how this technology can be used and maybe adopted if certain DoD grants get granted to certain individuals who wrote DoD grant proposals. 90% of computers are produced in China. China has a lot of state-owned companies, and back in 2014, Chinese actors started to really get heavily involved in sort of influencing those companies. We all know about Huawei and ZTE, the fact that they're basically banned from the United States and or most NATO countries currently. So it's really important to source where your information comes from. So woes, your supply chain isn't in-house. You outsource it. You don't produce your own computers. You buy them from someone else, and they buy their individual components from other companies. And you get it all in writing. So for example, we might have a contractor, like a vendor contract with someone that is in Texas and they subcontract to a company in Singapore. That visibility to subcontractors and how like resources like below first level vendors is like very hard. And you can get that stuff in writing, but the further you get away from your like initial contractor or vendor, the more likely they are to just lie to you straight to your face. And one of the biggest issues is acquisitions of companies. Sometimes you go into deal with an American company, that American company gets bought by a super conglomerate that's from Russia. And then that Russian like parent company starts influencing their subsidiary. These are like issues that you have to deal with. Your procurement folks or whoever works with procurement in your company does not spend all day looking at company acquisitions for foreign-owned companies. And the second you sort of you just forget about it, you don't really apply security anymore. So once it gets out of sight, it's out of mind. And because we have invented globalization and the internet, supply chain is like a necessary evil. You can't produce $1 million company or computers or economies of scale if you don't outsource and you don't produce with the cheapest materials with the cheapest people. So there's a lot of problems. Companies in America lose about $700 billion a year in fake components, fake supply chain, where you get lied to. Some examples of supply chain woes are about 30% of agricultural imports are labeled as organic while not meeting like USDA organic certification levels. That's just like one example, and then fake imports from China or Taiwan or Iran are just labeled as real products, and then they're actually fake. That's a huge issue, and you're misrepresenting your market value and selling it for an extreme markup because you're pretending to be something that you're not. And this is an issue across all industries, not simply just InfoSec, but it definitely affects us because we have all of our servers maintain information for the entire company. It's not just one product on a shelf, it's the company as an entity that's at risk. So in order to tackle this problem, you have to think sort of outside the box. It'd be one thing to sit down in a boardroom and negotiate with your vendor, say, oh, well, you can only source from Americans in American-owned companies with American products, but it's pretty unfeasible. It drives the cost up exponentially. Almost no private company is ever going to do that because it makes your computer go from being $6,000 to $60,000, and that isn't economically feasible for anyone that isn't basically the U.S. government, who spends a couple $1 trillion a year. So you have to start thinking outside the box. So if you have a trusted business partner, this is how watering hole attacks. Supply chain interdiction is basically just the hardware version of a watering hole attack. So they go out to a trusted partner and interdict their malicious firmware or hardware into the supply chain there. And then when you accept that from your vendor, you now have compromise. So hardware hacks bypass pretty much all software controls by nature. Everything on the motherboard implicitly trusts itself. So you can't go through cryptography. You can't go through authentication on the motherboard because it would slow down your computer an insane amount. So pretty much anything that's on the motherboard automatically has system level access. So if you have a rogue microchip, it gets to call the shots, and almost none of your controls from a software perspective will stop it. Now, networking controls can stop hardware interdiction attacks from like a command and control perspective, because you can watch command and control networks, command and control channels across your network. But as far as damaging your hardware, it's not really going to stop anything. So trust but verify. You can have the best business relationship with a vendor ever, but that's only good until they do something that compromises your network, and then your business has to go, goes bankrupt because you basically lost all your corporate data. So my idea was maybe I should just look at hardware. Maybe I should just look at a motherboard. So that's exactly what I did, except for I used a really high-powered laser. It's called a Raman laser, Raman Spectroscopy. The good news is USC owns a couple. The bad news is that they're $4 million a pop, and it takes a pretty long time to to image a single board. So this is me imaging a single PCB. This is a small microcontroller. It's not a super sophisticated motherboard. It's not very large, but what it does have on it is all the components of a regular controller or motherboard. So the idea originally spawned out of the super micro hack, which is 100% been debunked. But rogue microchips are easy to look at because they're predictable. So microprocessors are made of silica. They have super predictable atomic architectures. Transistors are built the same way by every single microprocessor manufacturer in the world and semiconductor manufacturer. So they are silica and with copper overlaying and some extra little trace amounts of certain elements for logic gate reasons. But the main components are silica, and that's about it. So silica doesn't form in nature. That's a manufacturing process, and you can't really get away from large-scale manufacturing processes in clean rooms to reduce silica. So I was like, why don't we just look for silica and only silica? So what you're seeing here, this is called the Raman Spectroscopy. If you look at this diagram and those two diagrams, the black part is silica, so the microprocessor, and the green part is the motherboard. So the motherboard is made of silica oxide. It is SiO2, and the processor is made out of silica pure. So what you do is you configure your scanning machines to basically look for silica atomic bonds and not for silica oxide atomic bonds, and then you highlight it in color. And that's pretty much what it is. Raman lasers work by shooting colored lasers, so lasers that are within the wavelength of colored light at objects, and then seeing how they refract. And that sort of generates certain energies. That's what these lines are. This is silica, so you can tell because basically someone sat down one day and shined a light like a laser on every single element that existed, and then wrote it in a textbook somewhere. And then you reference that textbook when you get your silica spectrum. So the point on these graphs down here is this cross right here, which is right on the microprocessor. And that's the line that's generated is this giant spike at about 510 centimeters over the -1st, which is how we measure wavelengths for whatever reason. And obviously silica just stands out. You can look it up in a textbook. And then you pair that with machine learning to basically do this in an automated process. And you just look for silica and you flag it. And then you would do this over your motherboards in general. And motherboards have a couple microprocessors on them. There's a bunch of subcontrollers for your PCI cards, for your audio card, and some other trace functionality on your server blade. But what you would notice is that there's about 9 or 10 microprocessors, and you just say, hey, there's 9 or 10, and these are the locations that they're in. And if there's 11, you just flag it, and then you go manually look at it. So basically, you're doing a baseline, but a hardware version of it.
You only care about the microprocessor?
Yes, microprocessors carry logic. Logic executes code. That would be the issue. So microprocessors can carry code that says connect to this IP address, execute these commands. That would be what you're looking to avoid. And you can hone in on these specific areas, and that's how you're going to detect.
So how do you make the Raman noodle machine find 10 versus 11? Or is that?
So we'll get there. How do we know it's microprocessors? They're required for motherboards to work. They're pretty important for computing. Basically, the entire history of computing is built from microprocessors getting better and better and better. Currently, microprocessors in your laptop are better than the shuttle that flew the Apollo mission. So there's a number of microprocessors on a specific motherboard. So I have like the Maximus Asus 7 motherboard. It's only going to have a set number, and that number will never change. And if it changes, you have a really big problem. Quick chemistry lesson to explain why this is possible. This is a periodic table of elements. You may have had to memorize it in high school chemistry. You may have hated that. This is silica. It's the 14th element on the periodic table. Kind of important. It's in this column. It's really important because it's not a metal or a gas. It's like a weird metalloid. It has 4 valence electrons. This allows it to create 4 bonds fairly easily. This is super important for its ability to be a semiconductor. This is the math that allows it to be possible. Basically, you can shine lasers on objects and elevate their electrons to higher energy states. And when you do that, it puts off X-rays that you can pick up with an X-ray detector. And then when it falls back down, you can also pick up the energy given off an electron ejection with an electron detector. These are 2 different imaging techniques that are used. This is coincidentally also the same thing that makes the sky blue. Sky is blue by Rayleigh scattering. Raman scattering is the same thing, but on a lower wavelength of light. So there's a wonderful math if you're really interested in it. I can send you all the wonderful math. These are the equations for Raman spectroscopy. They basically say, like, this is a wavelength, and this is how it falls, and this is the energy of the electron. This is how we know the electron is in its current wave function path. Not really important, but it's pretty fun to know that this stuff is pretty backed up, hardcore math. So we have 4 imaging techniques. I listed out all of them. I have a favorite and one that makes the most sense, but for educational purposes, we're kind of going to gloss over all of them. They go in order of resolution for how good they are and how much they cost. That way you can sort of make the best business decision. They are actually all used in industry for various solutions, but you as a consumer might not want to use them for your personal company. So first up, X-ray pictography. Awesome, best imaging technique. It gives you resolution in a 3-dimensional space down to 14 nanometers. It is currently used by AMD to reverse engineer Intel chips. So this is an issue. So this is actually the i5 chip from Intel. This is exactly what it looks. This is 2 micrometers in resolution. And you can see exactly how logic gates are stacked on a processor. And these are like the individual logic gates that allow electrons to flow that say 1 0 1 0 1 0. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. This is hilariously expensive. You have to use a synchrotron. There are less than 100 in the world, and really the only one that you can really use in America would be Lanels or Livermore's in California and apply for it. Spend $30,000 an hour to use it. But AMD uses it because AMD, through various reasons, has a legal allowance to reverse engineer Intel chips without intellectual property laws. So AMD uses to reverse engineer Intel chips and then make them cheaper and or run hotter. So that's how this is used. It's pretty great. So visibility, it's about 10,000 times more. Has 10,000 times more resolution than you need. But it's just like a really cool proof of concept because people say like, hey, you can't see. I read a bunch of papers that came out right after the Supermicro hack that said, hey, there's no possible way that we'd ever be able to detect this. I was like, why don't you just throw the thing in a synchrotron and then get a 3D planar resolution of everything that's in it and see if it matches what the vendor said that it was supposed to. It also takes a super long time. So it takes about 24 hours to do just the microprocessor, and that doesn't include the rest of the motherboard. So if you're looking at $30,000 an hour, you're going to be seeing a huge bill and a couple $1 million. So obviously not feasible for every single hardware item that you get. Better XPS, so electron photo spectroscopy. This involves shining an X-ray on objects, and then those give off secondary X-rays that are picked up by an X-ray diffractor at different wavelengths, and those wavelengths are mapped. So, for example, silica oxide has electrons eject with a binding energy of 104, and silica pure atoms or bonds give off wavelengths at 100. That might not seem like a huge wide range, but when your detection machines have resolution down to like the 5th decimal place, 4 is a really high number. So this would be a great way. Then you layer this on with machine learning and or just graphic coding to say focus in on this particular wavelength function, and it'll give you exactly what you want. This is an image of how it works. Shine X-ray, X-ray electrons come off atoms. I should clarify that the reason that X-rays are super great is because they're non-destructive. You won't destroy your computer hardware by putting it under an X-ray, i.e. like when you go through the airport, your laptop doesn't get fried when you come out the other end. There's a lot of other cool imaging techniques. The problem is that they usually involve either disintegrating the item and or high-powered electronics, or EM waves, which will fry any sort of electronic component that you put in it. So that's not going to work. So X-rays really came up as the only sort of material imaging solution. Originally my PhD was in material images or material analysis and a bunch of other stuff that doesn't matter. But anyway, that's how I got introduced to all this. So X-ray spectroscopy is more feasible. It has, it's a high capital cost. You have to buy an X-ray diffractor and X-ray spectroscopy machine, and you have to train someone to use it. It's a service phenomenon, so this is going to be less likely to pick up things. Motherboards, PCBs that like Arduinos are pretty simple. They have a flat board with small objects on top of them. Motherboards sometimes have large objects on them hiding other things. This isn't going to get any sort of penetration depth through thick material. We'll go through a regular motherboard, like the thin motherboard that's 1 millimeter thick. Will not go through that giant like cooling fan that you put on top of your microprocessor. So not going to work in that regard. But it provides clear definition between silica and silica oxide. X-ray computed topology. This is probably what you guys are most familiar with. If any of you have ever had a CT scan of like your knee or your head, this is the same technology. So it uses a computed topology. This gives slices of an object and is also my personal favorite for solutions. Basically, it shoots an X-ray through an object and then looks how it diffracts on the other side and then discerns what's in between and then produces a bunch of 2D images. So for example, this is a motherboard and this is a slice straight through the motherboard. And you can see like, this is where the main processor is and this is where the copper wires go. And it can yield a lot of good information. You would pair this up with, gold images or good versions from like the vendor. You'd have like a special delivered object from the vendor that says like, oh, we understand that you're going to buy, 500 certain, PowerEdge 730s from Dell. Like this is what our server equipment looks like. They provide that similar to how software vendors supply baselines and or hashes for their software before they give them to you. This is another image. This is actually an Arduino, a computed topology of an Arduino. And you can see like, this is a microprocessor. This is the giant shell with copper wiring that feeds into it. This is the processor in itself. These are some resistors. This is another processor. This is another processor. This is a Ethernet jack. And you can start to see how you could use this and line it up with gold images and machine learning to basically say like, take this, compare it to this image over here, and see if they're the same, and then highlight every area that you think is different. And the more you do this, the better it gets, because that's how machine learning works. This is basically where slides sort of stop being good. There is nothing on this slide after those two comments. There should be, but I did that like at 4 o'clock today. So it provides 3D analysis. It has great penetration depth. It goes all the way through the material. It's relatively cheap. CT machines are only like $800,000, which is a pretty good deal because you only need to buy like one of them. And then you can image all of your material. That's using a CT machine that we don't, that isn't currently purposed for this application. That's how much a CT machine is at a hospital. The good news about CT scans is if you get a CT scan of your knee, it doesn't have the best resolution. But I was talking to a doctor friend of mine, and he said you can get great CT scans of hardware because you don't have to worry about giving the hardware cancer. So you just jack up the strength on the CT scanner, and you get really good. What?
That has to have diminishing or some sort of consequence, right? Like we were talking about not zapping the hardware.
Oh yeah, but it's X-rays, so it has not like X-rays don't impact those atoms at all.
That seems like cheating.
It has a physical property, has to do with X-rays, science, technology.
Science. So there's a chemical reason that the
No, there's a physical reason. It's nothing to do with chemistry.
Physics. Interesting.
So you can get into it more if you want, or I could just send you a white paper on it.
Send me the damn white paper. I'm curious. That's interesting.
X-ray fluorescence. This is going to be your cheapest option, and one of your probably worst options. This is a blown up picture of X-ray fluorescence. I don't know if anyone's ever seen like phosphorescent rocks. They shine a black light on the rock and it glows. Or you ever played laser tag? Basically the same technology. So basically, certain elements shine or give off wave functions when you shine X-rays on them. Then you color them depending on the frequency. So this is a rock that was picked up and colored, and it has bunch of different elements on it, and those are colored in. And then you get down to like really in-depth functionality, like 1 millimeter sort of resolution, which by the way is way larger than any microprocessor that someone would ever put on a computer. 1 millimeter width is so insanely small that microprocessors would have to be larger than that. So you're looking for a grain of something that's the size of a grain of rice, which from a material analysis perspective is enormous, because we're constantly looking at things that are micrometer width. So a grain of rice is 670 micrometers across. So you've got 600 more times resolution than you need. So this is great. Unfortunately, it's not as great from like a resolution perspective because it doesn't have excessively high penetration depth. So it's more of a surface phenomenon. This is a blank slide that has no points on it, but will one day be filled in. It's more there as something like X-ray fluorescence can be done for like $20,000. It's super cheap. You don't need anyone with specialized equipment. I can literally give you a fluorescent light. You just shine it on the object, and then you start to see what comes back. To get a pretty colored picture, you have to use a computer, which would run you some software that was probably expensive, more so than the hardware that it ran on. But it's the lowest end of the stream and probably the cheapest option. So gold images baselines. If anyone has ever used DISA-STIG or CIS benchmarks, those are sort of like industry standards for how you should configure your security controls and policies on a computer for your group policy. And then you run it by your baseline, and that should never change. And if it changes, you usually have a problem in your environment. As well as just like regular hardening standards. So why not create a hardware baseline? So if I get software from a company as the vendor, they should also send me hashes of that software so I can hash it when I get it to make sure that it hasn't been waterholed or something like that. So why not do the same thing with hardware? Get companies as an industry to adopt doing CT scans on their hardware that they produce. How many motherboards are there? Like from Asus, there's a ton, but just image one of them and then publish that standard, and then other people can judge their hardware information by that standard. So this is unfortunate because it has to sort of get vendor adoption for it to be super effective, or you could manually check one board itself and then create your own image.
Just hope the board you got is a gold board.
Yeah, so that's kind of an issue. Well, you could check it yourself and say like, hey, is this board behaving weird? I don't know. There's a number of security controls I guess you could do, or you could image 50 boards and see if there's any differences between them. The more boards you image, the less likely you are, or the more likely you are to notice that one is different from the others. Yeah. Supply chain attacks are almost always targeted. It's not sort of one widespread thing. They can really only be carried out by government entities, state actors, and extremely powerful hacking organizations, which are usually funded by state actors. But if they were to sort of, interdict microprocessors into all motherboards, then that would be found out really quickly because someone's sort of networking security controls would pick those up. So they're almost always targeted actions. And if you had a, whole server farm, usually only a couple of those boards would be infected. Just from like an attack avenue feasibility standpoint. So issues with the solution does not stop a malicious manufacturing whom is compromised at the beginning. So say like a state-owned organization from a government that owned a lot of its companies that operated within its country's borders, not naming any particular names, from being malicious in the beginning by basically sending you an image that was bad and then giving you a bad board that matched that. That was the one issue I found in my head. I'm sure that there are others like cost, but
what about IP, like
intellectual property?
Yeah, for the company. How picky would they get about something like that? I mean, if AMD is using the tech to reverse engineer Intel's processors,
Yeah, so that would be probably an issue for. If, like, we wouldn't use pictography from a feasibility standpoint, but computed topology does not give that much information. Now, from an industrial standpoint, I don't manufacture motherboards, so I don't know what I could gain. Also, if you were in the reverse engineering business, I would just do that on itself because that's a super cheap technology to do. So I would be surprised if they didn't already, if they were in the business of reverse engineering objects. And have the capability to produce like silica wafers and things like that. I would be shocked if they didn't already own a CT scanner. So what can we learn? This is a super extensive process for a extremely low risk attack. It doesn't measure up on your BIA at all or any sort of security categorization. You're basically spending a ton of money to stop something that has almost never happened in like the history of cybersecurity, but it's theoretically possible, and it's happened like in a couple super minute situations. So you really got to put it into high risk like assets. I'm concerned with microcontrollers and like programmed guidance systems on nuclear missiles. So those would be considered high value assets. Your server that runs your Christian Minecraft server, like that is not a high value asset. You probably wouldn't spend tens of thousands of dollars doing this.
Minecraft server support is
So you gotta put your money towards the best solution. So clearly, photography not a great option for your buck. Fluorescence pretty cheap to do, but doesn't give you the most resolution. Computed topology, pretty good amazing resolution, fairly cheap, inexpensive. Don't really need to hire people. Honestly, you could probably hire like a lab tech that works for a hospital and get them to do this for you, and then put some Python code in there, and like you're off running, which may or may not be in my DHS proposal. So that's pretty much it.
How would you? At what point in the supply chain would you recommend, if someone was to spend a boatload of money at this, at what point in that process?
When you get it in your door, shipping. Procurement.
So your warehouse.
Yeah, because the problem with supply chain is that you're outsourcing. So what you want to do is try to like bring in all of the tools to fix the problem in-house. So what you're trying to say is like people go overseas, people outsource within the country, and every time it leaves your corporate boundary, like you have problems. Now, inside of your corporate boundary is insider threat, and that's a completely different ballgame. But outside of your corporate boundaries, outside of your nation, like that is basically, you have trusted vendors, you have trusted avenues of communication, but really all of that's sort of wishy-washy, bad territory. You want to bring it in-house, and you want to sort of throw up your fences, put up your guard. So procurement before you put it in your server rack.
Yeah, but you ordered a full Dell server, so now you got to take the thing apart, which is probably going to break your warranty. And then
if you use computed topology, you don't have to take anything apart. You just put it in, and it's like it gives you.
If there's like a
X-ray
big power supply in front of
I mean, you can you go in these things when you're in a hospital. Like you as a person, like
they'll take you apart.
These objects are large. these imaging machines can be massive. So like you as a person can fit in one. So most hardware is not the size of you.
That raises a question that I have, and that is in most manufacturing scenarios, you've got several different configurations over the lifetime of the manufacturing run of a particular product, where this chip gets used for the first 100,000 we built, and then that factory burned down, or the guy embezzled all the money and they went bankrupt, and so we're using this other chip now, made it this is a different plant. I have to believe that's going to corrupt your golden images.
So those are usually marked by, like, I buy the MH-Z7170 like
So
W board, and then like at the very end of it, all of a sudden there's a U there. Like that's because they used like a different chip for that one.
Yeah.
They provision those part numbers differently, so they could produce a new image.
And gotcha. It just has to be per part number. And
Yeah, or serial number.
yeah.
All right, you raised your hand.
Yeah, can I ask you a question in computer topology?
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, when they actually get the visuals, I'm not sure what I'm asking, but are the visuals going to be different for each of the computer's motherboard or anything that you're?
Are the visuals going to be different? Ideally, they'd be exactly the same. Now, that's in the perfect world. I guess if you're saying, like, if they zoomed out further, it might be smaller, or...
Yeah, minute differences in motherboard. I'm just
Yeah, so actually,
So
computed topology is actually used by QA in motherboard, like, producing companies and semiconductor companies currently. They actually do this to their systems already, which is why I think they could provide them to us. It's because motherboard manufacturers already produce computed topology images of their motherboards to check for QA in QC.
So slight orientation differences where the screw in this corner of the motherboard is half a turn tighter, so the board's tilted. That's already solved.
Yeah, hopefully by their QA department. Now, these produce 3D rotatable images. These are 2D representations of those. But you can produce, if you look up computer topology on Wikipedia, they have an amazing 3D, like, revolving image of a webcam. And you can see like how the camera's in it and the microprocessor inside of that, and some of the little like wires and stuff. And you can look at the 3D rotation of that. You can do the same thing here. So you pick 4 corners and just pin the computer and then zoom into the necessary resolution and then start your sort of comparison. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I'm thinking if something is telling me that each motherboard you look at with this technology is gonna be different, but it might be level, like micro level, they will be different. But in that case, you can also use it for something
you might
else.
be correct that at like a microscopic or atomic level, like there's going to be differences.
Yes.
But what you're looking for is something that is not microscopic.
Oh,
A processor's, like a rogue processor, is about the size of an LED light, which from a atomic perspective, microscopic perspective, imaging perspective, is massive. You're looking for trillion silica atoms bonded together, which is a natural thing. So you're never going to see that sort of, I guess, reverse entropy in nature. So you never expect it to be a defect.
It's not so much as a defect. Well, what I'm looking at is, okay, since we can use it to formulate a baseline in case of intellectual property or whatever, we can also use this for security. That's what I'm looking at. If for the micro level, they are all going to be different, but the visuals are taking this method. So there's a possibility it would be a very powerful security posture.
Yeah, the idea would be that if you could effectively roll this out and implement it, you would never have to deal with supply chain interdiction ever.
There you go. That's right. That's the aspect of it.
Yeah, that's the goal. I wrote the paper, and that would be really feasible. And I wrote DoD grants for this, but
At what point in the supply chain would you get for free?
oh, if I was to attack it,
Yes.
the FedEx truck that went to your company.
So you grab the server,
There's 2 places. I would either start at the very beginning in the factory,
right?
where it was like, hey, we're custom making something. So I work in ICS, so Industrial Control Security. That technology is very on the order basis. Like Emerson has not that many customers that buy their Delta V solution and have their controllers in place. It is fairly easy from an OSCENT perspective and from like sort of just like looking at purchasing values to figure out who is buying what. So I could look at Savannah River, purchase a large new control system. Like currently we're upgrading our control system and there aren't enough controllers that have been produced for us to receive them. So we have to wait 3 months for them to continue to produce those controllers to fulfill our order. Like for the next 3 months, all of those controllers are coming to our company.
Everything that comes off the factory line is coming to your house.
Yeah, it's fairly easy to discern where those specialized computer equipments, like objects, are coming to or assets are coming to. So I would interject at the beginning, at the source. I'd go to China. I'd pay some guy who makes $1,000 a year, 50 grand to let me have some time alone on the factory floor, look the other way, and I'd get away with it. Or if I was the Chinese government, I would threaten to move all of their family to a concentration camp, and then just do it anyway.
So the second place you said is that the FedEx truck. So they grab the server off the FedEx truck and then
Or you figure out what they're doing, and then you build you'd be a state actor in this situation, so you have the ability to make a object. So you basically break in, swap the motherboard, put it back in the box,
or have a pre-built server and just swap the damn boxes.
That's what, or just swap the boxes.
My understanding sounds like grab it off the truck, go, I don't know, put a new chip on it, and then put it back in the truck.
Oh yeah, you're not soldering.
You're
not on unsoldering an LED and resoldering in a microprocessor in the truck while it's moving. You're just gonna take the box.
That's the Redneckistan approach.
you're gonna either open the box and replace the object, or peel the label off of that box and put it on a new box, and just already have the server produced, for like.
With the DeWalt cord.
Got
it.
Oh shit! American infrastructure. There's too many road bumps.
That DeWalt comes with a rat tail detector. If you don't have a mullet, you're not gonna be able to use that drill.
Here's your server, sorry.
Did you have a question?
So I got a couple questions.
Okay, awesome.
The first one being, is it possible that some of the techs that are in these labs working on the microprocessors don't know the destination of the processors that they're working on?
Oh yeah. That's 100%. Yeah, from a manufacturing perspective, there are people who build these things. Most of it is automated processing. There's a factory that spins these up. They make silica wafers. The silica wafers are stacked. They press those into Intel chips. By the way, Intel chips, if you didn't know this, those numbers that come off the Intel chips are just the purity of the silica wafer.
I was just about to ask, isn't their manufacturing process sort of this scattershot thing where they make a bunch of them and then test them? And
so
this is the best class of chips that we have.
Yeah, so the way that Intel makes processors is they produce a massive silica wafer and then they test different parts of the silica wafer for basically purity. If you go back to the pictography picture, because this actually can show you what so you can just basically they look at it in sort of this scale and say this is a really pure chip and this is a really bad chip, and then they stack those and then they sell them as different microprocessors. You're not looking for the microprocessor. The microprocessor itself is not going to have defects in it that are supply chain that are a malicious actors affected the Intel i9 chip that you bought. What they're going to do is put an additional microprocessor on your motherboard and just wire it into your LSAS line, and this is going to inject command and control, 5 command and control commands, and that's all it does on a loop. And that's the only logic it has on it. It's hey, send a remote netcat to this address. Now that would be super easy to detect by basically every firewall, but you get the point. It's going to do one basic thing, and it will already have system level privileges because it's on the hardware, which means it has more privileges than the kernel. So that would be the issue. So if I was a guy working at Dell or not at Dell, Intel, and I was producing microprocessors, no, that wouldn't be the person. I was the person working at Novatech, which is a small distributed control systems company that's based in Baltimore, and only has 5 customers. That would be who I would target, because That's like a more sort of personal level, and they custom build their process control modules in-house by hand. So that would be where you would attack. You'd find vectors into companies that were very isolated and you sort of knew where everything was going, or you would intercept it at the last possible moment when it was guaranteed to be going to that organization. And if it's coming from something like Dell or HP, they produce hundreds of thousands of those objects. You would just buy one yourself at the exact same specs as the previous object, do the maintenance in your garage at home or lab, and then put it on the FedEx truck.
Not exactly a supply chain attack, but how did Meltdown and Spectre affect the supply chain?
Meltdown and Spectre is a hardware issue in the manufacturing process of Intel. The reason it's going to take so long to remediate, Intel has to completely revamp how they manufacture silicon wafers from the get-go. The reason is because the way that they layer chips, they use speculative learning, which is where Spectre got its name from, basically predict what you're doing. And what Spectre does is it compromises the speculative learning that's garbaged. So basically the computer tries to predict what you're going to do next. And what Spectre does is it reads all of that predictive logic that it's thrown out because you didn't do that, and then tries to reinterpret what you were going to do. Does that make sense? So I don't know what you wanted to know past that.
No, I mean, really, I was just thinking of from a vetting standpoint, what could organizations have done to look at the integrity of their supply chain for something like that? Not necessarily an attack, but
you
just
could
configuration on the vendor.
Have a guess. Yeah, from that, for Spectre and Meltdown, those were issues in Intel processors from when Intel began speculative learning back in like the 90s. That someone figured out how to tap into and then reverse engineer what you would be doing on a computer.
And it only took them 2.5 or a decade and a half.
Yeah, a decade and a half to figure it out. And there's nothing by looking at this or like images of a processor to be like, oh, the speculative learning clearly has a vulnerability that would allow me to read it. And reverse engineer, because it's basically like looking at alternate timelines of our future and then trying to interpret what the future is, which is what Spectre is. So if you were to type in like CA, the computer might think that you're going to type T next, and you could read that. But if you typed like P instead because you're spelling cap, like that would be wrong. But you can sort of reverse what the computer was thinking, and that's how Spectre works. I do not have any idea how that works. I just assume it probably does the same thing, and they gave it a different James Bond name.
And what made you get into the security world from the science world?
My company was like, yo, does anyone want to do cybersecurity? I was like, I fucking hate my job. And they were like, cool. They were like, cool, you do it. I'm like, cool. I learned C++, Java, and like Visual Basic in high school. They were like, awesome, you're qualified. Here's your promotion. You're also our ICS cybersecurity lead. And they're like, go to 10 SANS classes. And that was it. So that was how I got it.
You go wrap your jaws around this fire hose and good luck.
Yeah, it is one of the worst jobs ever. I love it. I work like 15 hours a day. I hate like almost everything, but super like I had to figure out how to like send an email without just like cursing out a person because they asked if I could do something, and I was like, it's impossible because my ISSM has no idea how computers function. So like I have to answer them, and I'm like, hey, they're like, oh, can you go rescan your server? And I'm like, okay, if I rescan the server and I parse it out, like it's not going to show the installed software because there is no installed software because it's a blank server that only does virtualization. Retarded, like, and obviously not lose my job, which at this point I'm like really trying to do, but I don't think they can fire me. So sort of got myself in that sweet spot of like we could try to fire him, but then like our systems would explode. So I enjoy it. I like cybersecurity. It's fun. I always get to keep learning. My goal is to be the best at ICS cybersecurity in the world. I watch Jack Ryan, so I'm like hoping that someday someone lands a helicopter and they're like, "We need you," and they're like, "Only you can prevent forest fires, Mackenzie." And like, "You come with us right now."
You realize what happens like 4 scenes later, right?
Yeah, I get shot.
You're in a bulletproof vest and getting shot at.
So hashtag goals. But yeah,
I want to bleed out at the feet of Jack Ryan.
So that was the goal.
Does blockchain have any relevance to?
I have a great paper on blockchain if you want to read it. So when I worked at T-Cube, actually, I worked on blockchain. That was my job working for T-Cube. I was to build in blockchain and cloud integration into software compliance, or not software compliance, insurance, policy and claims platforms. So
But in terms of
for this,
yeah.
blockchain is a method of tracking shipments, but it won't be. There's just the problem with blockchain in supply chain, and blockchain is really sold on the solution of like, oh, if you have a blockchain that like measures your supply chain, then you'll know where everything comes from. The blockchain exists in the ether, in electricity, and the internet, and all physical objects exist on our plane of relevance, and something has to tie those two systems together, and it's usually barcodes or RFID chips, and both of those are like the most compromisable objects on that. Like the barcode is literally just a word of black bars and like white bars, and RFID chips are cloned by every single person with an RFID like reader. So the unfortunate part about tying blockchain to supply chain, which is really great in theory, is that shipping manifests are in this world and blockchain is in that world. And I don't know how to do that. And if someone does, you got like a $100 million company waiting for you to start, and please hire me. So if you want to figure that out with me at some point in the future, we can go to business together.
that's more
I'm wondering, going back to your like gold image analogy, like how would, let's say Intel did share their gold image, here's what your board should look like, how would they share that with the world and not have it be photoshopped or maliciously that image?
The way that, so like say you do like virus definitions, right? You update your virus definitions for your host-based virus solution. So you have Symantec, McAfee, Microsoft Defender does it natively. Most of them do natively, but say you have offline systems. So I have 139 isolated systems. They're all air-gapped from both the internet and each other. So all of those have to be updated manually,
Right.
with like a CD or a flash drive. Flash drives. So I download said virus definitions from the internet, and then
Did anyone else notice his soul shriveling a bit after you?
So if you go to McAfee's website and say like, I have McAfee version 15, they're like, oh cool, here are your virus definitions for the hour, because they update them every hour. They also produce a hash with that. Now, this is susceptible to watering hole attacks. So if they compromise McAfee's website, replace the virus definition with a virus definition plus a virus itself, and then replace the hash with said functionality, you would have an issue. So the idea is that when you get software that's publicly available and they publish a hash in multiple locations, not all of them would be hacked. And ideally, you would take that hash and then bring it down to your level and just keep it. The same thing would happen. So say like ASUS published like, this is our new Hero motherboard, because ASUS has really cool names for all their motherboards, like Hero and Maximus and stuff like that, or Z Pro. You would go grab it, and then you'd bring it down to your local server where you keep it. And then every once in a while, you could refer back to their old image to make sure that they're the same thing. But you would basically just bring it down offline and keep it, and then you would check all of your motherboards against that object. And then you're basically putting an additional layer of security. So not only do I have to do a hardware interdiction into your supply chain, which is already like an extremely difficult task, I also have to hack ASUS and basically change hack their entire environment and swap out their image for my rogue image. So not only that, I also have to get a CT scan of my own malware board So like you're just basically adding extreme layers of difficulty. There's no amount of defense that exists that will protect you from everything. But what we can do is do layered defense and just add more obstacles that someone has to jump over. And then in maybe 2030, we can read about like the super cool hack like Stuxnet that like it's talked about forever, where someone like hacked an entire company, like used 20,000 spies, and then compromised someone, and then broke one centrifuge or something like that.
That's where I think blockchain could be
or
effective, is like maintaining that original image or
if you just push that hash on blockchain, bam, you're done. You just always refer back to the blockchain.
Yeah.
Done. Easy. Checkmate. Just add blockchain and like white text on the bottom of my slides. It's picked up on all
You totally should.
on the Wi-Fi.
You need to do it like one digit off in the hex code so that it's different but not discernible. Won't even render on those screens.
All right. I guess that's about it. Long story. Thanks for listening. I am presenting at B-Sides Augusta. Not this presentation. This is going to the SANS Supply Chain Security Conference in August, but in October 5th for Augusta. I actually got that email today. My presentation is going to be on creating a management network for ICS that allows you to create a secure architecture that allows you to manage multiple air gap systems, which has no relevance to my job at all for no particular reason, and for reasons I won't discuss, would never be an idea that I would pitch to my managers. And that, for a reason, doesn't have to go through counterintelligence, because it's produced independently. Nothing inputted from my job.
Oh. Let's see how you've done this.
I just like the visual in my head of you running around with the CD updating servers.
Okay.
Do you use the mini CDs?
No. Yeah,
You
no.
use the CDs that look like little 45s?
No, I use regular CDs.
Oh, come on.
DVDs, which are super inefficient.
Oh, yeah.
So DVDs. All unclassified systems, I can use a flash drive. All classified systems use one-time burnable CDs, which means for classified systems, I burn like 15 CDs. And that's how we do information transfers. So it's like,
Do you burn a disk per machine?
yeah, because you can't go system to system with disks. Because when you put it in the CD, use it, and then take it out and you put it in a grinder. And like,
But why?
because what happens if I put information on that CD from the classified machine?
It's one time read, one time write.
Yeah, great idea. It's almost like someone should have suggested that to their management team and got shot down.
It's minus R, not plus or minus R.
So-
The RW.
Those grinder
No, they don't have-
machines. No. Those grinder machines are really cool.
Yeah, we actually have some dope stuff. We
Yeah.
should see our surplus classified hardware. We fucking melt. Like that shit's amazing. Yeah, that's annoying. So I have a lot of those. The coolest ones are the ones where I have to like put the Radcom suit on and like walk inside and like, you have 5 minutes. Go,
In the
go,
bunny
go,
suit.
go, go. Like, I could like, it's like, I leave, and then like, all right, now I have to like piss in a cup to figure out if you like accidentally breathed in any radioactive elements.
Wow.
Like, oh, cool. Here you have like, you wear these special rings, and they're like,
You watch Chernobyl yet?
Dude, that there's so many things wrong, by the
Yeah,
way,
90
from a
seconds
historical accuracy. Like, we can have a whole discussion on it.
Man, it's just good television.
Yeah, it's like really roughed up. That is not how radiation works at all. Like, people do not melt at all, or have like, you just fall over and die. Like, that's how it works. Like, people who die of acute radiation poison look exactly the same as someone who like had a heart attack from the outside perspective. I work a dosimeter at work, and that gives you a radiation dose, because as a Department of Energy employee, you can only be exposed to so much radiation above the regular radiation dose of an American. So on average, you're exposed to 0.5 rem per year, and radiological workers are only allowed to be exposed to an extra 0.5 rem per year, so twice the dose of an average American. So if you get exposed, my company actually has a policy to be exposed to 0.1 extra. You're not allowed to do any more radcon work for the rest of the year, which is pretty cool. And people get in trouble for like putting their dosimeters in like X-ray machines to like drive up the radiation exposure by like be like, oh, I just want to wear my dosimeter during my dental X-ray. People have gotten in trouble for that. But I wear a second dosimeter called the Death Stick. Everyone watches Star Wars. But it's basically like a cylinder that I wear, and they're like, if this turns blue, it means that you died of acute radiation poisoning. Because like Kirchhoff flashes happen, and then it flashes it blue, and then you also instantly die, pretty much. Or if it turns blue, you're about to die because you suffered a lethal dose of radiation. I'm like, why am I wearing it then if it's not going to produce like any sort of information for me to live? And they're like, it's not for you. Yeah. It's for us for insurance purposes. When we find your dead body, we know that you died of radiation versus like some other hazard, like the building falling down or a hydrogen explosion or like a heart attack.
So if you just happen to stroke out and then get the radiation?
Yeah, well, that's like, I don't know about that, where you're just like, oh, I had a stroke or I had like a brain aneurysm at the same time that a criticality that I was exposed to. But apparently my insurance policy pays out like 5x if I die of radiation exposure versus like regular death.
Nice.
So it's just for like insurance purposes.
That's the Powerball.
Yeah, right. It's like the power. It's like
the blue stick
the
Powerball.
blue Death Stick Powerball. So like right before I die, I could be like, cool. My niece is gonna luck out on life.
Not funny. It's not funny.
I mean, I think it's pretty funny. The biggest risk of death at work is actually suffocation. So I work 40 meters underground. So I don't see like the sun a ton because like I work in a windowless room. I have pretty like printed out pictures of like the beach like hanging on my cubicle wall. But I work underground and during the winter, and I work like 10, 12-hour days. So like during the winter, I don't see the sun for 4 days, which is pretty lame. But we work in a negative pressure area. So we have tritium, which is a radioactive isotope of hydrogen. We keep it in glove boxes, which are basically like plastic containers. And inside of that, they keep negative pressure, and we keep the whole area negative pressure, so like 0.9 atmospheres. That way, air always flows in and never out. So if you have like a tritium leak, it doesn't flow out to like the environment and affect like the community. Even though we have a 310 square mile area, so we have like 100 like tens of miles between us and the nearest livable area. The idea is that like that way radiation never like leaks out. But we flood those glove boxes with nitrogen because hydrogen reacts with oxygen in a very explosive manner to form water. And tritiated water is like 1,000 times more lethal than tritiated gas because like if you breathe in hydrogen, you just breathe it back out. If you drink water, your body absorbs it and like puts it in cells and then it alpha decays inside of you. So lethal. Which is why one of the coolest things I think is weird is that apparently a safe way to dispose of tritiated water is to shoot it in a water cannon into the sky, which is what we do. So we have like tritiated water and we put it in a water cannon and we shoot it into the sky into EPA levels of safe. And then it rains down on these trees that is called phytoremediation. It gets picked up via their roots and then it absorbs it into their atomic mass where it can decay safely as part of a tree.
I don't think the tree thinks it's safe.
I don't think it's safe. Apparently it's okay to walk these areas like while the water cannons are going. I will never do it. I don't believe in it, but apparently they say it's safe, which is probably the same thing they said about cigarettes in like the 1800s. So tritium, cool. Yeah, actually the biggest way that I can die at work is nitrogen poisoning. Basically, we like flood the facility with nitrogen, and then if like there's a nitrogen leak, like everyone just gets really sleepy and then falls asleep at their desk and then dies.
Yeah, you'll die before.
So we have like all these giant blue lights that hang down and measure like oxygen content. If it falls below like 20%, like all these alarms go off and you grab like the nearest gas mask and you're like, well, escort yourself out of the facility. Which is really funny because we had like a small person that was like 80 pounds and she got stuck because we have airlocks and it's under negative pressure, which means you have to like push because you're pushing against outside pressure on the door. She got stuck in the airlock between the two doors because she didn't have enough strength to open them because they're both pressurized. Yeah, she's stuck there for like 2 hours. It was really funny. I make fun of her all the time.
I'm sure that wasn't funny to her at all.
No, not at all. It's like the only way out of the facility. So like someone's bound to.
I've been stuck on an elevator at work before. That shit ain't fun.
Yeah. That happened to me at USC.
Hit the
on
bathroom
campus.
in the lobby, kids. Hit the bathroom in the lobby.
You have to establish a pee corner, obviously.
Oh God, were
That's
you,
where it fell apart.
were you in the Snowden door?
No, wait, what? Sorry. I lived in Bates House all 4 years.
Okay. I'm sure the elevator, they had an elevator, right?
They had 3. They were
Yeah.
very dysfunctional, all of them, and I got
Yeah.
stuck 1 year.
I'm sure one of those elevators has a pee corner in it.
Oh, they all have pee corners. Have you ever been at Bates House? Bates House, they're
Not in like.
I was an RA for
decades.
3.5 years. Like, there are 23 residence halls on campus, and Bates House is responsible for 44% of all incidents.
Oh God.
Think about the ratios there, all right? I was an RA for 3.5 years. I had some of the craziest stories if you ever want to talk about.
Jesus.
We got like someone breaking down the door with a hammer. We got like people getting stuck in the elevator. We got crazy shit. We got pot dealers. We got broken glass bottles being chucked from like buildings. Like, wow, we got tons of shit. We got fire on the roof. That was one of the. Yeah, someone set a campfire on the roof.
A campfire? God damn it.
Which was supported by Base West, which is 4 stories higher than Bates House, and they're like, "Hey, someone lit a fire on your roof," and I was like, "What the fuck?" So anyway, presentation. I need to figure out how to make this a little bit more clear, or targeted focus to cybersecurity people. You obviously had an expressed opinion about like how this could be really good. I'm trying to figure out a better way to sell this to cybersecurity folks. My background is in chemical engineering, and I sort of lucked my way into this current career field.
I'm thinking IoT.
What?
IoT. People with IoT.
I wish IoT would die, but I know it's not going to.
I wondered if you could, like, if you were to start a company, it would be, I think, as to offer imaging.
Yeah, it would be a
service.
contractor to offer imaging services. I'd put one of these in a truck and I'd drive it around. I'd park it on your company, image all of your servers. I'd be like, you're good to go.
So you just moved it from the FedEx truck to your truck.
Hell yeah.
Right. Then obviously you could
Sorry,
be,
it's called a mobile operational unit.
you could be attacked or infiltrated, but yes,
Yeah, but you can
that's
take
how.
Yeah, but then like that would be in our like service agreement. They would I would owe them money.
I'm thinking you can convert those images into strings that could subsequently be used in some kind of.
Yeah, technically you could bitmap this.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know how to bitmap a 3D image,
It's possible it could be done.
but I'm sure you could because everything is technically zeros and ones. So it's 0 and 1 it. From a machine learning perspective, I just looked at laying these images over each other over and over again. I actually looked at using technology and current computing sort of machine learning algorithms that look at 2 images and then like pick out all the differences. Like if you're aware of like the game where it's like, oh, pick out the 7 differences. People have used those and put them in like algorithms that like detect those differences. I looked at that technology because other than the Raman Spectroscopy, which I borrowed my ex-girlfriend is a PhD student at USC, which probably helps you understand why I'm not a PhD student at USC anymore. She let me borrow her laser to do the Raman spectroscopy, but I don't have the funding to go out and do this. So it's basically a proof of concept of 8 other like ideas from other vetted sources that if you like logically stack them on top of each other, says that you could do this. So that's how I framed my paper. It says like, if you can do these 8 other things in isolation and then you do them all in a row, like this is a logical consequence. You could validate all of your supply chain via hardware analysis.
Yeah.
Which is how most research papers are written. So,
And then as soon as you do, the next day your
I
executive
have
director is gonna click on a phishing email and get ransomware. So
I have some ideas, but I'd like to discuss it with you if you're interested.
yeah, of course.
Okay. I'm going home now.
Yeah. Okay, I don't have any cards. My email address is my name.
one of your names.
Actually one of my names.
I'll just take a picture of it.
Yeah, so it's just that's my Twitter handle, by the way, Zero Altruism. I made a Twitter because I went to Sands and everyone there had a Twitter. I was like, do I want to make a Twitter that's my name or do I want to make a Twitter that's a hacker handle? And I originally got hired to be a pen tester, so I went with the hacker handle version, which is actually just my Steam name. So I'm creative. But I figured it was cool, InfoSecchi.
You're on
And
LinkedIn, right?
I am on LinkedIn, yeah. If you just type in Mackenzie Morris, I'll be right. I'm the first one.